Normandy, June 11th, 1944. 5 days bleed onto the calendar after the chaotic dawn of D-Day. Mud clings to everything, a persistent, earthy reminder of the brutal struggle etched into the French countryside. Elijah Carter, a corporal barely past his 23rd year, Ohio-bred and battle-worn, peered through the grimy optics of his Sherman tank. The air hung thick and stagnant, a suffocating blanket woven from diesel fumes, damp earth, and the barely suppressed stench of decay. His world narrowed, a green-tinted rectangle framed by steel, the distant tree line a hazy suggestion of hidden dangers. A crossroads, a mere intersection of dirt tracks, yet its significance was amplified by the war's relentless logic. Control the crossroads, control the flow, control the region. Carter's orders were stark, unambiguous. Hold the position, observe, report, but do not engage without explicit authorization. A silent morning, ostensibly, yet the very stillness screamed of impending violence. The distant rumble of unseen engines, the crackle of static-laced radio transmissions, these were the ominous whispers preceding the storm. Then he saw it, a ghost in the green, a vehicle emerging from the shadowed depths of the forest. Not a tank, not anything resembling the familiar predatory silhouettes of panzer divisions. It lacked a turret, a gun, the brutal armor plating that defined the German war machine. Instead, a squat, rectangular body perched awkwardly on treads, a tall, ungainly antenna like a metallic stalk reaching skyward, dwarfing the vehicle itself. Figures swarmed around it, frantic, gesturing with an almost feverish intensity. It was not an attacking force, but something else, something more insidious, a command vehicle. The realization hit Carter with the force of a physical blow, not a mere supply truck, not a misplaced transport, but the nerve center of an armored unit, the brain dictating the movements of steel behemoths. The implications were chilling. Destroy this vehicle, and you cripple an entire fighting force. The opportunity was fleeting, a fragile window in the relentless grind of war. The voice in his headset, calm, disembodied, reinforced the standing order. Hold fire. Repeat, hold fire, awaiting target confirmation. Each word dripped with the weight of protocol, the ironclad rules of engagement, no unauthorized shots, no risk of collateral damage, the inherent danger of civilian casualties a constant, agonizing consideration. The crossroads might be a silent stage for a deadly ballet. Civilians caught in the crossfire, their lives collateral damage in a war they never chose. Doubt gnawed at him, a cold tendril in the heat of the moment. Every fiber of his training screamed for restraint, for obedience, yet the image burned into his retinas. The command vehicle, vulnerable, exposed, the keystone in a potentially devastating attack. He glanced at Lieutenant Grant, his commanding officer, hunched over a map, oblivious to the unfolding drama, the lieutenant's concentration unwavering, his face etched with the fatigue and grim determination that defined every soldier in Normandy. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing eternity. Carter's finger hovered over the trigger, the metal cool beneath his sweaty skin. The decision, agonizing and inevitable, was about to be made. Without a word, breaking protocol, defying orders, he squeezed. The Sherman shuddered, recoiling from the brutal discharge. The 75mm armor-piercing shell screamed through the humid air, a steel dart aimed at the heart of the enemy. In less than 3 seconds the die was cast. The round hurtled toward its target, carrying with it the weight of consequence, the potential for glory or disgrace. The single unauthorized shot that would ripple through the ranks, scatter the German forces, and alter the course of the Allied advance in that sector. A shot fired not from malice, not from recklessness, but from a deep, primal instinct, a gut feeling that transcended orders, a soldier's intuition honed by the constant presence of death, and no one, not even Carter himself, could have predicted the magnitude of what was to come. Elijah Carter, the man who boarded that transport ship, bound for the horrors of France, was no gilded hero, no myth forged in the crucible of expectation. He was Newark, Ohio, 1921, spring sunlight filtering through lace curtains in a modest 2-bedroom house, a home defined by the quiet strength of a widowed nurse, his mother, and the calloused hands of his older brother toiling in the relentless clang of the rail yards. No military tradition, no grand narratives of valor, just a boy grown into a man by the slow, steady rhythm of small-town life. Summer jobs that etched the sun into his skin and responsibility into his soul. Delivery truck routes that wound through sleepy streets. The dusty diamond of the town baseball field, where he played third base with a stubborn grit. The quiet solace of church pews every other Sunday. The war had been a distant hum, a series of black and white images flickering across newsreels, the crackle of voices resonating from the radio, a world apart from the familiar comfort of Ohio, a tragedy unfolding on foreign soil, then Pearl Harbor, a seismic event that shattered the illusion of distance, dragging America into the global conflict with a brutal force. December 1941, the line irrevocably drawn. By April 1942, Carter had already volunteered, not drafted, not compelled by patriotic fervor, but driven by an internal compass, a sense of duty that resonated deep within him. He chose the Armored Division, not out of any romantic fascination with tanks, but because it felt like the sharpest edge of the fight, the place where he could carry his weight, where his actions could make a tangible difference. Fort Knox, Kentucky, the clang and grind of metal, the roar of engines, the endless cycle of training that transformed boys into soldiers. Carter was assigned to a Sherman tank crew, the primary gunner, his hands growing familiar with the cold steel of the firing mechanism. It was there, amidst the cacophony of war preparations, that he honed his senses, developed an eye for pinpoint accuracy, an ear for the subtle nuances of silence. While others roared with laughter in the barracks or engaged in boisterous camaraderie, Carter remained withdrawn, focused, polishing his optics until they gleamed, memorizing range charts with painstaking detail, listening to the quiet hum of anticipation that vibrated through every soldier on the cusp of deployment. Spring 1944, the unit shipped to the southern coast of England. 6 weeks of relentless rain, mud that clung like a second skin, the endless drills that mimicked the chaos of beach landings, the complex maneuvers that would become life or death, the hedgerow tactics that defined the brutal landscape of Normandy. Morale ebbed and flowed like the tides. The invasion loomed, an inescapable shadow, the knowledge that not everyone would return a constant, unspoken companion. Carter's crew landed on Utah Beach the morning of June 6th. A relatively smooth landing compared to the carnage of Omaha, but the days that followed were anything but serene. The relentless advance inland met with fierce German resistance, the ever-present threat of ambush, the constant barrage of artillery fire. The second week of June, the Germans began to push back, their armored divisions, including the feared Panzerlehr, arriving to stem the Allied tide. American tanks, like Carter's Sherman, were suddenly thrust into daily combat against machines that were heavier, better armored, and commanded by seasoned veterans. The odds were stacked against them. For every Sherman, the Germans deployed tanks with superior firepower, thicker armor, and commanders whose experience was etched into every tactical decision. Yet Carter possessed a quiet, understated quality that would prove invaluable, the ability to discern the essential from the noise of battle. Sometimes instinct trumped doctrine, sometimes the human element could overcome the limitations of machinery. He wasn't the fastest shot in the battalion, but he was unerringly precise. Not the bravest in the squad, but his resolve remained unwavering. And above all, he paid attention, absorbing every detail, every nuance of the battlefield, which is why, 5 days after landing on Utah Beach, when a German command vehicle materialized from the shadowed depths of the forest, Carter recognized the danger before anyone else. He saw what it was, comprehended its significance, and knew with an unshakable certainty that hesitation would be fatal. The days immediately after the D-Day landings were not a tapestry woven with heroic acts. They were a grueling marathon of waiting, a test of endurance and resolve. After securing a fragile foothold on Utah Beach, Carter's tank crew was assigned to the slow, grinding advance south through the bocage. An endless labyrinth of high hedgerows, sunken roads, and hidden ambushes. A sniper's paradise, a tanker's nightmare. June 10th, the air thick with oppressive humidity and bone-deep exhaustion. Reports flooded in of German armor regrouping, the ominous whisper of Panzerlehr, one of the most disciplined and heavily equipped units in the German army, infiltrating the area. The Americans harbored no illusions. Their Shermans were outgunned, outmatched. For every American tank, the Germans could unleash a machine with heavier guns, thicker armor, and a crew seasoned by years of combat. The orders became tighter, more restrictive, dictated by the limitations of their equipment and the ever-present threat. No engagements without clear orders, no unauthorized offensives. Carter heard the mantra repeated during briefings, etched into his mind like a battle scar. Do not open fire unless fired upon first, or unless higher command confirms the target. Period. The reasons were obvious, brutally pragmatic. The dense hedgerows limited visibility. The skies were patrolled by American bombers on constant sorties. Misidentification, even by mere seconds, could lead to friendly fire, the loss of a crucial position, or worse, the horrific tragedy of civilian casualties caught in the crossfire. In tank warfare, fire discipline was sacrosanct. Commanders drilled it into their men relentlessly, a litany of caution. Wait for the call, confirm your range, double-check your target, don't assume, never assume. Even within the cramped confines of a Sherman, the weight of these rules was palpable, the consequences of disobedience severe. The crew called Carter the clock, not for his speed, but for his unwavering steadiness. Under fire, he moved with calm precision, his actions deliberate, devoid of panic or recklessness. He never guessed, never improvised, and now, for the first time, that unwavering calm was under immense pressure, the clock ticking toward a moment of irreversible decision. June 11th, Lucky 7, the Sherman's name stenciled in white on its turret, was one of 3 tanks positioned near a critical crossroads east of the village of Villers-Bocage. Infantry units had yet to clear the woods to their east, leaving the tanks vulnerable, instructed to maintain a defensive formation until reinforcements arrived. The crew had been awake for nearly 20 hours, sleep coming in fleeting gasps between radio chatter and the distant rumble of unseen movement. Approximately 11 o'clock hours. Carter scanned the horizon through his periscope, his gaze sweeping across the distant tree line when he spotted it. A peculiar silhouette moving slowly along the dirt track that snaked through the trees. Unlike the familiar predatory shape of the Panzer IVs he had studied during training, it lacked a turret, its chassis was taller, and most strikingly, a massive whip antenna rose from its rear, a conspicuous marker against the verdant landscape. He leaned closer, his eye glued to the scope. The vehicle moved in fits and starts, pausing at intervals, as if marking positions or conducting reconnaissance. Behind it, 2 other tanks followed, their movements cautious, deliberate. This was not a spearhead attack, but a coordinated maneuver, the methodical preparation for something far more sinister. Carter reached for the radio handset, his fingers fumbling in his haste. He reported the sighting to Lieutenant Grant, his voice tight with urgency. The lieutenant squinted through his own scope, offering no immediate response, then relayed the information up the chain of command. The reply arrived minutes later, terse, dismissive. Do not engage until identification is confirmed. That was all. No further context, no acknowledgement of the potential threat. Carter sat in silence, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He focused on the vehicle again, now stationary at the edge of a clearing, its crew partially exposed. One man, armed with binoculars, stood on the rear fender, scanning the surrounding area with a discerning gaze, as if directing traffic. It was undoubtedly a command vehicle, its presence a clear indicator of impending action. Yet rules were rules, orders were orders, and so Carter waited, his finger tapping rhythmically on the edge of the scope, the clock relentlessly ticking toward the moment he would have to choose between obedience and instinct, between following orders and trusting what he knew to be true. The target revealed itself. The woods were eerily silent. The usual chorus of birdsong and the rustling of wind through the branches had vanished, as if the earth itself held its breath, anticipating the storm. Inside the Sherman, Elijah Carter, his eye glued to the gunner's scope, watched the German vehicle with the intense focus of a predator, patiently waiting for the slightest mistake. It was not moving with speed, merely crawling through the gap in the hedgerow. Deliberately, almost carelessly. And that, in itself, spoke volumes. This was not a reconnaissance vehicle attempting to evade detection, but something that believed it was safe, confident in its position, The German command vehicle, unmistakably a Panzerbefehlswagen or command tank, had taken its place near the intersection. Its antenna, a tall, spindly spire, swayed gently in the breeze. Two officers dismounted from the hatch. One carried a map case, the other raised field binoculars, his gaze sweeping along the tree line toward Carter's concealed position. They were completely oblivious, unaware of the eyes fixed upon them, the potential for annihilation just a trigger pull away. Carter lowered his head slightly, his pulse quickening. He reported the sighting again, his voice laced with urgency. Unarmed command variant spotted, no main gun, antenna confirmed, 2 officers exposed, requesting engagement clearance. The response was immediate, robotic. Negative? Await visual confirmation from recon. Maintain position, hold fire. Carter bit the inside of his cheek, the metallic tang of blood filling his mouth. Sweat trickled from his helmet strap, running down the side of his neck. He remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. Through the scope, he observed the German officers gesturing toward the rear of their convoy. A Panzer IV rolled forward, taking up a position behind the command tank, followed by another. They were not advancing, but organizing, preparing for something, a carefully orchestrated push. The implications were chilling. Carter had witnessed this scenario in a training film, a chilling foreshadowing of the present reality. The Germans used these mobile command tanks as battlefield control hubs, positioned near the front lines to orchestrate armored assaults, directing fire, issuing commands, reacting with lightning speed, far surpassing the Allied units' ability to maneuver. To eliminate the command tank was to decapitate the armored unit, leaving the rest disoriented, vulnerable. He reached for the radio again, pressing the button with greater force. "Sir, this is Carter. I'm looking right at them. It's a Befehlspanzer command variant. There's no mistake." Lieutenant Grant's voice, calm but cautious, crackled through the headset. "Stand down, Corporal. Higher command says wait for recon. No exceptions." From behind, Private Marsh, the loader, whispered, "You sure it's what you think it is?" Carter didn't respond. His focus remained laser-like. Through the scope, he watched one of the German officers raise his hand, pointing directly toward the left flank, toward the path where the infantry had yet to be fully reinforced. A moment later, the Panzer IVs began rotating their turrets in that direction, their guns aligning with deadly precision. They were preparing to strike. Time was evaporating, each lost second bringing the impending ambush closer to fruition. Carter exhaled slowly, his hand hovering over the trigger wheel. He knew the rules, the repercussions. Firing without authorization could result in a court-martial. Insubordination under battlefield conditions was an offense the Army treated with unforgiving severity. His entire career, his very freedom, hung in the balance. Then his thoughts shifted to the infantry down the road, the men without the protection of armor, still setting up machine gun nests in the hedgerows, blissfully unaware that 3 German tanks were preparing to unleash a devastating barrage. He refocused his gaze, the officer still gesturing, the antenna swaying like a defiant finger against the blue expanse of the French sky. This was the moment, the last vestige of safety, the ultimate test of his resolve. Carter tightened his grip, meticulously adjusted the elevation, the subtle movements of his fingers betraying the immense pressure bearing down on him. He felt his breath settle, a stillness descending amidst the chaos. Then he made the decision, the shot that would shatter the rules. Elijah Carter's hand was steady amidst the cacophony of internal voices, the warnings, the orders, the imagined bark of his drill sergeant demanding obedience to the chain of command. A profound silence settled within him. Focus, the kind that emerges when a person is poised to commit an act of irreversible consequence. He reached down, carefully rotating the turret a few degrees to the right. The command vehicle remained in place, seemingly invulnerable, its crew oblivious, their fate about to be sealed by a gunner 200 yards away, a man who had just chosen to defy orders, to trust his instinct above all else. "Target acquired," Carter whispered, the words barely audible. Inside the tank, no alarms blared, no sirens wailed, no orchestrated crescendo of cinematic grandeur. Just a man and his trigger poised on the precipice of history. He wrapped his fingers around the firing lever, the metal warm from the sun, familiar, like the grip of a childhood baseball bat. Then he pulled. The 75mm armor-piercing round erupted from the Sherman's barrel with a violent hiss, a white-hot flash, and a deafening boom that shook the crew to their bones. The tank recoiled, its treads digging into the soft earth. Private Marsh ducked instinctively, shouting, "What the hell was that?" No one answered. Carter's eye was already back on the scope, tracking the round. He saw the shell hurtle through the air, a dark blur against the vibrant green and gold of the Normandy countryside, before slamming directly into the side of the command vehicle. For a moment, nothing. Then an eruption of fire. Not the grandiose Hollywood explosion of gasoline and shrapnel, but something tighter, hotter, more surgically precise. The shell had pierced the lightly armored side of the vehicle, igniting something within, possibly the radio equipment, perhaps the fuel line. Flames erupted from the top hatch. One of the officers was ejected, landing limp on the roadside. The other vanished in a burst of orange and black smoke. The antenna snapped in two, collapsing like a broken flagpole. Then came the shouting, not from Carter's crew, but from the German tanks behind the wreck. The Panzer IVs had frozen, their formation disrupted, their gunners paralyzed, unsure of what had just transpired. Without their command vehicle, they lacked direction, their attack faltering. Carter knew what came next. He swung the turret toward the nearest Panzer IV, yelling, "Load high explosive, fast!" Marsh, still shaken, snapped back into action, grabbing the next shell and slamming it into the breach, but he never had to fire. The German tanks began to retreat, not a full rout, but a deliberate, cautious withdrawal back into the tree line. The brain of the operation had been severed, leaving the body floundering, unable to execute its commands. Inside the Sherman, silence hung heavy for several seconds. Even Lieutenant Grant, who had climbed halfway out of the hatch, stared in stunned disbelief at the column of black smoke rising from the crippled vehicle. Finally, he turned to Carter. "You fired without orders," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, not a question, but an observation. Carter looked up, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir." Grant paused, then muttered, "Good shot," and retreated back into the tank. The fallout, the orders, the consequences were still to come. The fire continued to burn as the rest of the unit arrived. By noon, infantry had secured the crossroads, and the sounds of battle faded into an uneasy quiet. The smoke from the destroyed German command vehicle drifted upward in thin black ribbons, curling into the summer sky like a dark, ominous benediction. The body of one officer lay face down near the road, the other still missing, likely consumed by the inferno. The Sherman's engine fell silent. Inside the tank, Carter sat with his back pressed against the cold metal hull, his breathing shallow. No one spoke to him, not yet. Lieutenant Grant stepped away to radio headquarters, leaving Carter and the rest of the crew alone in the sweltering heat. Private Marsh leaned against the turret, breaking the silence. "You really did it, huh?" he asked. Carter didn't look at him. "I did." Marsh didn't press. They all understood what was to come. Disobeying a direct order in combat, even with good intentions, was a serious offense at best, a reprimand, at worst, a court-martial. The army frowned upon lone actors. War was inherently chaotic, and discipline was the only thing that prevented it from devolving into utter slaughter. And yet no one could deny what had just occurred. The Germans had been preparing for a coordinated attack. The command vehicle Carter had destroyed had likely been directing an armored thrust toward the vulnerable left flank, a path that led directly to a field command post and a medical station. Had they succeeded, the consequences would have been catastrophic. But none of that could be definitively confirmed, not yet. A jeep arrived late in the afternoon, carrying 2 officers from headquarters. They began their investigation, asking questions, taking photographs, measuring the crater left by the Sherman's shell. They interviewed the tank crew one by one, including Carter. He told the truth, explaining what he had witnessed, why he believed the vehicle was a command variant, the indicators that had compelled him to act. He described the officers emerging, the antenna, the hand signals, the behavior of the tanks. One investigator nodded slowly, the other simply scribbled notes. Carter didn't inquire about the impending punishment. He didn't need to. Later that evening, after sunset, Lieutenant Grant approached him outside the tent line. "They're not pressing charges," Grant said, his voice low, his eyes unreadable, no reprimand, no hearing. Carter blinked, surprised. "Nothing. They're calling it a tactically appropriate judgment call under conditions of incomplete communication, which I think is code for you saved our ass, but we don't want to encourage it." The lieutenant offered a short, humorless laugh. Carter exhaled for the first time in hours. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked out toward the dark tree line where the Panzer IVs had vanished hours earlier. Was it the right call? He asked. Grant hesitated, then said, "It was the only one that mattered." A few days later, Carter was quietly awarded the Bronze Star without ceremony. The paperwork acknowledged his initiative and decisive action under threat of enemy maneuver. No press release, no headlines, no radio interviews. Just a medal, tucked away in a box, soon to be forgotten by most, but not by the men who had witnessed the event. They knew what had almost happened and what one gunner's decision had averted. Confirmation, the irrefutable evidence, arrived 2 days after the smoke had cleared. The full weight of Carter's decision finally revealed, not as praise but as undeniable proof.